All right, so today we're going to go over component 2, which is all about our special right triangles. So in component 1, we learned about right triangles, but they were just like any right triangle. So when are we just have any right triangle and we're given 2 of the sides, then we can use Pythagorean theorem. However, we have 2 different kinds of triangles that are what we call special right triangles. One of those special right triangles that are special is called the 45-45-90 triangle. So a 45-45-90 triangle comes from this guy right here. So essentially it's being made from taking a square and then cutting it in half. Now, because these are both 45 degrees, that means that they're equal. And if you remember from one of our last outcomes, when we have 2 angles that are equal, that means we have 2 sides that are equal. This is an isosceles triangle. Okay, so if this was 5, then this would also be 5 because it's an isosceles triangle. Okay, and then technically we could use Pythagorean theorem then to find this third missing side. Okay, however, there's some nice rules that we could use when we're solving 45-45-90 triangles. So if we have 2 45-degree angles and a 90-degree angle, this is one of our special right triangles. And for our special right triangles, like I said, this is going to be an isosceles triangle, which means these 2 sides are going to be the same. So our parent triangle is going to say that this side is 1, which means this side is also 1, and then this side is then root 2. So we're going to use this triangle here as our parent triangle. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use what we learned about our similar triangles, and we're going to set up proportions. So this triangle and this triangle are similar, right? So we could set up proportions like we did in the outcome 6 with these 2 triangles. So I want to find x. So we're going to match these with this one. So if we look here, the 90-degree angle is pointing to the root 2. If I look at this problem, the 90-degree angle is also pointing to the x. So the x matches with the root 2. It matches because over here, this 90 degrees is pointing to the root 2. This 90 degrees is pointing to the x. So those match together. So my first fraction here is going to be x over root 2. Now, if this is 45, then this one also has to be 45. So then that means that this 45 is pointing to the 6, and if we look here, the 45 is pointing to the 1. So the 6 matches with the 1. So this fraction is going to be 6 over 1. So we take x over root 2 and 6 over 1, and we set up a proportion just like we did in outcome 6. Now, like in outcome 6, we're going to cross multiply. So we have 1 times x, which would give us x, equals 6 times root 2. And if you think back to the learning we did a couple of lessons ago, when we multiply, this has a square root, this doesn't, so we cannot combine them. So our final answer is just 6 square root of 2. We cannot make that the square root of 12. Okay, because this is a square root and this is not. So we just have to leave it as 6 root 2. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing for example B. So if we look here, our 90-degree angle is pointing to the x. If we look here, our 90-degree angle is pointing to the root 2. So the x and the root 2 are together. Now, because these are the same, that means it's an isosceles triangle, which means each of these are also 45, which means these match with the 1. So now we're going to set up our proportion. X over root 2 equals 9 root 2 over 1. And now we're going to cross multiply. So we have x times 1, which is x. And then we have 9 root 2 times root 2. So just like in this problem, I couldn't multiply the 6 times the root 2, right? So I can't multiply the 9 times the root 2, but I can do root 2 times root 2, which we learned in the other lesson, root 2 times root 2 gives us just plain 2. Now these can be multiplied and we end up with x equals 18. Okay, so let's look at some more examples. Now if you look at the top of the lesson, there is a sheet that I attached on the lesson so that you can print it if you have a capability of a printer. It should look something like this. Now you are going to get to use this on your test, so if you can, I would try to print it. If you cannot, I understand. So we're going to say, okay, well this triangle matches with this triangle, and now we're going to match the pieces, right? So I would like you to try these 3 problems on your own and then check the answer key. I'm going to jump down to example 2. So in example 2, this is an isosceles triangle because these are both x, so that means it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle, which means it then matches with this triangle. So now we got to match them up. The 90-degree angle is pointing to the 12, so the 90-degree angle is pointing to the root 2, so the 12 matches with the root 2. And then on either side of our triangle is the number 1. So both of the x's match with 1. So now we can set up our proportion. X over 1 equals 12 over root 2. Okay, just like in the last problems, we're now going to cross multiply. So we get x times root 2 equals 12 times 1, which we know is just 12. Okay, now in math, how do we undo multiplication? Well, in order to undo multiplication, we use division. So I'm going to divide by root 2 on each side. So that gives me x equals 12 divide root 2. Now remember, I can't make this a 6 because this has a root and this doesn't. So I'm not allowed to make this 6. But if you think back to our lesson the other day, we're not allowed to have a square root on the bottom, which means in order to get rid of that, we're going to multiply by root 2. But we know in math, if I do something to the bottom of a fraction, I also have to do it to the top of the fraction. So on the top, I have 12 times root 2, which we know we just have to leave as 12 root 2. And then on the bottom, we have root 2 times root 2, which because they're both roots, that just turns into a plain old 2. Okay, but now we can notice that this 12 and 2 both don't have a square root. Right here, this had a square root and this didn't, so we couldn't do anything. Now these both don't have a square root, so 12 divided by 2 gives us 6. And then we still have the root 2. So our final answer here is 6 root 2. Okay, now let's look at this example. So this is an isosceles triangle, which means both of these are 45. Okay, now let's match it up on this paper. Well, the 90-degree angle is pointing to the root 2. The 90-degree angle is pointing to 5 root 2. So I'm going to put root 2 under this one because it matches. These ones match together. And then 1s are on each side, so 1s go with the x. Now we can set up our proportion. X over 1 equals 5 root 2 over root 2. Well, guys, if you notice, won't these root 2's cancel? So on the left-hand side, I have x divided by 1, which is just x. And then on the right-hand side, all I have left is 5. Oh, look, I'm done. Hey, all of them won't be that easy, but that one's a nice, easy one. Let's look at number 5. So number 5, this is a 45, so this one also has to be 45. Now let's match them up. The right angle is pointing to the root 2. The right angle is pointing to the 18. So the 18 and the root 2 match together. The other two sides are a 1. So that means these two sides are a 1. If this one is an x, this one is also an x because they're an isosceles triangle. So now we can say x over 1 equals 18 over root 2. Cross multiply. X times root 2 equals 18 times 1, which is 18. Now, to get x by itself, the opposite of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide by root 2. Divide by root 2. Now remember, these cannot divide because this is an 18 and this is a root, so we can't divide them, so we get 18 over root 2. However, we know that we're not allowed to have a square root on the bottom, so to fix that, we multiply by root 2 on top and bottom. So on the top, we have 18 times root 2, and on the bottom, we have root 2 times root 2, which is just 2. Finally, 18 and 2 can simplify, and we end up with 18 divided by 2 in our calculator is 9, and then we still have that root 2. Okay, I would like you to try some of the problems on the next page and then check your answers on the answer key.